We're going to start by making some pine. I'm going to start with a dark blue-green, activate my watercolor, and then I'm going to use just the brush to create the pine needles. It's going to be kind of a fluffy pine. I'm going to keep a middle section kind of clear. I'll go back later with brown after this is dry to create the branch. And I'm not going to pick up any more paint or any water. I just want to let it dilute itself as I go. I'll have some dark and some kind of a medium tint. For the most part, they should be going the same direction, but it's okay to have a little bit of variance because it's something found in nature. That means some of these will overlap. I just want to give them a chance to dry for a bit. Rinse my brush. I'm going to start with another leaf. This time it's just going to be a very generic pointed tip leaf. So I start with the outer shape of the leaf and then I'm going to go back in and create the pointed ends. So they're just little triangles that I'm pulling paint from. Make sure to match on the other side. Now that I have the shape, I'm going to pull some of that paint from the middle or just let it dry. Rinse. And we're going to get some more color. The next one that we're going to paint is the holly. The holly is probably one of the most traditional plants or greenery that we have in our Christmas wreaths and decor. So I start with the shape of the leaf, and then I'm going to, just like the last one, get the pointed edges. I'm not re-dipping into the paint. I'm not getting any more water. I'm using what I have already on my brush. Now I'll do the same thing on the other side, get the pointed ends. And while I'm painting, I am looking at a reference picture on my computer. I am looking at what these plants actually look like as I'm painting them. That way they look pretty accurate. This is not from memory. The thing with painting these in this way, you're not drawing anything in pencil. The only pencil mark that you'll have on your final draft will be the circle that your wreath is going around. So all of these leaves should be painted, no pencil. So this time I did the outline first and then I'm filling it in. This is actually so I get crisper edges. And then the center will be a little bit lighter because that's the last area with paint. You can go back in while it's still wet and just pick up a little more paint, add a little more color to it, get it darker if you want to. Now, the next one I'm going to do is some spruce. It's a type of pine. So I found where the center would be, and now I'm making the little pine needles that are coming off of it. If you're doing pine leaves, definitely you want to start with the stick and then do the pine needles. You can start with your darker color first, let it dry, and then go back over top with your lighter colors. But you definitely want to get multiple layers so that you get lots of depth. I'm being very careful since my paint is still wet to not touch the branch. And if it does a little bit, that's okay. But there you go, got some pine needles. Now, since this one is a little bit more dry, I am going to go back and just add in a couple more pine needles. As your paint dries, you may want to go back and do an extra layer to darken anything. If you're painting over top a dried layer, this could be called glazing. It's also a wet on dry or a layered wash. There's lots of names. And now that those leaves are getting a little closer to dry, I'm going to go ahead and add in the little holly berries. Being very careful not to touch the corner of the leaf just in case it's not dry. Holly berries grow in groups of 2 or 3, sometimes singular. Next, this is mistletoe. So I'm just using the brush, putting pressure on the brush to get thicker strokes and then lifting to get a thinner stroke. Mistletoe is more of a yellow-green. It's a lot longer and has some very interesting shapes to it. So I'm just pulling that brush down. Creates that nice shape. So that's mistletoe. Rinse my brush, change colors. Next up, this is a eucalyptus leaf. Eucalyptus tends to grow the leaves around the stalk, and they're more circular. So sometimes, depending on the perspective, it's going to be a little more flat like a pancake. So after I paint my leaves and these dry, I will go back with a brown, very light brown, and create the stalk. So there's just a couple of eucalyptus leaves. Get used to painting the shape. Next, I'm going to paint a magnolia leaf. It's just a very classic leaf shape. Almost like a football. For this one, I did start with the outline and then I filled it in. Got a nice clean wash. Because of my reference photo, I am going back and just darkening a little bit, crisping up those edges. This leaf is very shiny. So that means typically it does have some high contrast between the folds. Now we're going to check these leaves, make sure that they're dry, get the same color, and paint over top. This is a glaze, also a layered wash or a wet on dry. So I'm adding in a couple of details, get the veins in the leaves, maybe fix the outlines if I want a little bit more contrast, get some shadows. But you have to make sure that it's completely dry before you do this or your paint will run. Now I'm going to get the brown and I'm going to go back in and add some of the stalks to these. Again, I can only do this because it's dry. Otherwise the paint will run and I don't want that. So add those little twigs in. And this might have a couple of brown needles or it might have some extra little twigs coming off of it. For the last little pine that I'm going to paint, I'm going to start with that center line. I'm going to paint this the opposite of the first pine branch that I painted earlier. So I'm going to be very careful. Oh, well, so I thought. Since I know that paint is still wet, I'm just Being very careful not to touch the brown. It's okay if a little bit gets in there. These pine needles have a little bit more curve to them. There's several different types of pine, which you can see in the reference pictures here in the slideshow. Remember, these come from nature, so not everything is perfect. They are perfectly imperfect in every way. I did go back with some fresh paint, got some darker needles in there. It's good to have some depth and have different values. I'll go back later with some yellow-green.